What is up? And welcome. We are here to talk about the champs on tonight's DLF team preview series. We're continuing to just bring out great breakdowns of every one of the 32 teams. And as always, we get smart football people in here to talk about it and talk about their team, break them down. But I'm going to push back and talk about the players, and we're going to find out exactly how much fantasy value there is. But yeah, like I said, we're here to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the champs. And we're going to ask the question, is it possible to have too many offensive weapons? I think that might be a problem if there is any in Tampa Bay, but you're reaching when that's the problem. We'll talk about that. I'll introduce you to the guest right after this. Let's talk about the champs. And joining me, I got a couple of people that I can't wait to introduce you to. JB, I'll start with him. He's down here at the bottom. And, I've been on the show a couple times with JB. He's a great guy. Make sure you're following him. Got his Twitter handle right there. Fun follow. He's a writer at Razzball. He does the Fantasy Besties, Fantasy Impact Today, all kind of great stuff. JB, what you got going on, man?
Appreciate it, Cal. Thanks for having me. As always, love chopping it up with you. That intro music gets me fired up, bro. I gotta tell you, that brings you out. All right, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to talk champs. Let's go.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And then right here to my left, we got Brandon, Deep Dive Fantasy Football, the podcast. I know you said you got a website there too. Make sure you're following him. Check that out. And it's at Deep Dive FF, right? That's your Twitter handle?
Yes, that is the Twitter handle indeed.
Yeah. And you said you got some draft stuff coming up too?
Yeah, so what I've been working on right now is it's kind of like a two-parter, right? I have the podcast, which I try to do something different, right? We have, a lot of good content out there already. So what I do with my podcast is I basically give the analysis and the thought process behind my rankings. And I always build my rankings off my projections. So I do statistical projections for every team. So that's what my podcasts have been recently. It's me breaking down each team, one team per episode, how I got to where I got to, explaining the ranking basically. And it goes hand in hand with the projections and the draft sheets. It's just like a link on the Twitter if anybody wants to check it out. It's got consistency. It's got risk ratings, last year's stats, my projections this year. You can change. You could put in your own projections and it'll rank the players for you according to yours. It's got a bunch of other stuff I put in there, some player notes, good stuff. So if anybody wants to check it out, feel free. It's free, just there for you. But yeah, that's me, Deep Dive Fantasy Football.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, make sure you do it, guys. Go check that out. And then, so Brandon, let me just start with you because you mentioned the projections there. So I did projections one time on one team, and that was enough for me. I thought I was going to do all 32, but one is plenty, and it's a lot. But this is the time of year where we're drinking out of a fire hose, right? There's so much information. We got every team showing up. There's camp battles. There's all that. So you got to pay attention to the storylines, figure out what's going on. So we'll start with this question that we already had queued up. What storylines in Tampa are you paying attention to right now the most?
So for me, I think it's the easy answer, right? But I think it really is the true most important answer, and it's the running back position. Everyone, first off, wants a stud running back all the time. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to miss out on those stud running backs depending on where they're drafting, if they decide to grab a tight end earlier. They go wide receiver, which I don't know about you guys, but I would never suggest to start a draft that way. But a lot of people want to find those running backs, and it's possible to find one here in Tampa. So that's probably the biggest positional battle to pay attention to. And I feel like this is one that even fellow Bucs fans that are plugged in, like me and JB, we might end up disagreeing. I'm not sure what his stance is on that. So we'll have to see which running back he's going with. But I definitely think that's the thing to pay the most attention to.
Even if you disagree with JB, he's always respectful and fun to joke around with about that. I can know that from personal experience. But you mentioned everybody wants a stud running back, except for maybe Bruce Arians? ? JB, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the running back thing is obviously on everybody's mind, but it's not really a camp battle that I'm paying attention to. It's the storyline part of things. And I want to see how the young secondary looks. They played out of this world last year, and if you remember, coming into last season, they were ranked as one of the worst secondaries in football. And there were rankings coming out that had them as number 32. And they really took that to heart. And they played with a chip on their shoulder because of that. So I'm interested to see if they still have that same fire this year, because they can't get complacent. If they get complacent, it's going to bring us a step back. So that's really the storyline I'm looking for, to see if these kids can continue that and grow from it.
That's a good point, because in 2019, it seemed like the cornerbacks and the secondary did struggle, and you wanted to start players against Tampa. But then coming into the last season, you stopped wanting to play anybody against Tampa because the defense was so stout. And I guess that's part of the story with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right, Brandon? Is that, like, when you think about the playing players against Tampa, I mean, look what they did to Pat Mahomes. Like, do you start worrying about starting people against this defense?
I definitely would. And I'm going to say something, right? 2019, everyone's like, oh, the stats aren't great for the Bucs defense. Man, the Bucs defense, and I'm sure JB knows about this, Carlton Davis, he did not just show up last year. He was like a very good, probably top 15, borderline top 12 corner in 2019. The reason that the Bucs defense always looked so bad was because they were always put in horrible situations. So it was fine for starting guys against the Bucs defense because their offense is getting the ball at the 20-yard line on their side, because Jameis is turning over the ball and whatnot. So now that the Bucs are able to finally be successful, to have a quarterback that was not turnover prone, all of a sudden they've also got more time to breathe on the sidelines. Everyone can see, hey, the Bucs defense is actually really good. Yeah, it did get better, but it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference having that quarterback change. But yeah, I definitely do think that it's not a team you want to start very many people against, for sure.
And Cal, just to add to that real quick, you bring up, Brady doing the right thing on offense and putting them in a good position. But think about the offseason and the practices that they got to go against Tom Brady. Guys like Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean have come out and said he made us better. Practicing against the best player to ever play this position made us better. So it was another impact that he had on them in that way, that had them step up in practice, which in turn had them step up in games.
Yeah, and the wide receivers in the room too, that they're going to be guarding now with a quarterback that makes more sound decisions.
The depth chart really, like I talked about it at the beginning, like, can the team have too many offensive weapons? We mentioned the running backs already, and you got Leonard Fournette, you got Ronald Jones, you got Giovanni Bernard. Like, Keyshawn Vaughn is what, just a special teams guy now? I mean, like, just thinking about the running back room, like you mentioned, Brandon, like, is there anybody that at ADP that you guys are actually drafting? I mean, JB, are you drafting Ronald Jones?
Yeah, at ADP. His ADP is around 85 right now. So you're talking about a 7th-round pick in a 12-team league. In the FFCC draft that I'm doing right now, he went 8.8. So, I mean, I'll definitely draft him at that level. He's being drafted around guys like Melvin Gordon and Kenyon Drake, and a group that's looked at as split backfield guys, right? I don't think Fournette's going to cut into his workload as much as others think he will. I think Fournette's going to be a guy who can spell him and be more of like a hammer to come in when Rojo wears the defense down. Plus, Rojo's the guy who we've seen break those big runs. He's the guy that when he hits the hole and gets out in space, he's taken off for 70. So I'll definitely draft him at his ADP of 85. I'll take him in the 7th all day long.
Brandon, does Bruce Arians hate Ronald Jones? Why does he keep bringing in running backs every year to compete with him?
Man, that's the question I don't know how to answer. I will kind of jump on what JB was saying about Ronald Jones. I actually agree. So it looks like we're in agreement on the running back room. Leonard Fournette, he was so much worse. I actually have efficiency metrics. I don't know if you would want me to go into all that, but Ronald Jones was so much more efficient in every single sack category except for receiving. But Leonard Fournette's not even a great receiver, and now they have Giovanni Bernard, so that doesn't even matter anymore. So Ronald Jones was better in every single way. I feel like everyone hates on him because of his 20-carry rookie season that everybody overreacted to. And I do think he is the guy to own, but I'm not drafting him anywhere. And it's actually for twofold. It's because the 7th round is the money round for wide receivers for me. That's where I'm getting my Tyler Boyds. That's where I'm like LaVisca Chenault's like just after that. Like all of those, Juju Smith-Schuster, all those wide receivers that I love because I always go running back really heavy up top. All the wide receiver value is in that range. So I actually never end up drafting running backs in that range because of that. And historically, it's usually pretty supportive towards that draft philosophy as well. So if you find yourself needing like that RB3 because you haven't taken enough yet, I do think Ronald Jones is a good shot, one of the best running backs in that range for sure. But I prefer to not put myself in that position and to have like super solid workload stud running backs. Because also, like, even if Ronald Jones wins the job, it's still Tom Brady with 3 elite receivers, Gronk, and now OJ Howard who's back. So there's only so much potential to be there.
I love it. We're definitely going to get into the target leaders and the rush attempt leaders. We're going to do that here in just a little bit. Let's talk about sleepers, though. So, like, JB, I'll go down to you. Like, if there's going to be a sleeper, like somebody that we're not really thinking, we're not drafting high, that breaks out and is really productive for us on this team, who is that?
I mean, everybody is being drafted where they should be, if you look at it that way. So, you can't really look at a guy like Chris Godwin as a sleeper because he's a stud. So, I mean, really, my answer to that's probably going to be Ronald Jones being where he's drafted in the 7th round. I like the way that Brandon answered that question because, he talks about how he goes running back heavy early, so he's drafting wide receivers there. I tend to hammer a couple of running backs early, then hit a couple of those next wide receivers, in that Thielen type group, right? And then in the 7th round is where I'm looking for that RB3 that could be that breakout guy who can be a borderline RB2. So that's where I think you're going to get Ronald Jones as a quote-unquote sleeper because he could produce with his 7th or 8th round value just the same as a guy that you're drafting in the 3rd or the 4th. So that's why I would call him the sleeper of the group.
That makes sense. Brandon, who do you think it might be?
I actually think that when JB said everyone's being drafted where they should be is true. So I honestly, being candid, right, not being biased, I don't think there's a sleeper on this team for redraft. I do think for dynasty purposes, if Antonio Brown leaves and maybe Chris Godwin is gone, I don't see that happening. He's been the poster boy for their media over Mike Evans for the past 2 years, which I like to look into little things like that. Sometimes I think it kind of hints at what the organization wants to do. So it'd be surprising if Godwin's out the building, but it's possible that him and AB and Gronk are all gone next year. So I'm looking at wide receivers, either Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson, or Jalen Darden. I think the most talented of the group is Tyler Johnson. I think Scotty Miller has the best trait to bring to the table based off what would be left, which would be his speed, obviously, because Mike Evans isn't a fast guy. And if we lost AB, who's can function in that role in Godwin. So I think one of those receivers would be your best shot for a sleeper for dynasty, but for redraft, I really don't think there is any.
Yeah, dynasty, you mentioned Antonio Brown there. He's going off as the wide receiver 61 right now, which for somebody that can be as productive as he is, I know he's 33 years old, so there's not a ton of dynasty value there, but that seems late. That seems like somebody, if you're playing for now and you can get him later on, that seems like that could be pretty good. Tyler Johnson, JB, let me ask you about him because he's going off as the wide receiver 102. I mean, basically completely forgotten right now. And I just feel like Tom Brady loves him. It feels like the 3rd down last year towards the end of the year, he was looking for Tyler Johnson. I saw the news clip out of camp from yesterday that the very first pass Tom Brady threw went to Tyler Johnson. Like, it seems like he loves him. Like, and if there's going to be somebody that might be a sleeper, it feels like it could be him.
He's reliable. I mean, he's got phenomenal hands. I remember just watching him in Minnesota even. He was a great wide receiver, and I love the draft pick, but it's just so crowded. I mean, I don't see an instance where he's going to play over Evans, Godwin, or AB, right? So let's say they go 4 wide. Depends on what they're looking to do because Scotty Miller's still in the fold too. So if you need a guy to come in and run a slot route, then okay, it might be Tyler. If you need a guy to come in and run an outside route, then it's going to be Scotty. So it depends on what they're looking to do. I don't think there's enough opportunity to call Tyler a sleeper this year, but he's a guy that if you're in a deep draft, especially in a best ball, but definitely in any sort of deep draft, I would grab him at the end of a draft just in case. AB's not young. Evans and Godwin both have dealt with their injuries. So if something happens to one of them, surely he could step up and have a big role.
Brandon, good question just came in here from AJ that I wanted to get to as well. Like, we know how much Tom Brady loved James White in that pass catching role. I mean, seems like the kind of thing that maybe Gio Bernard could be a slightly better version than James White at that. But like you said, do we just kind of continue to come back to with this team that, well, there's so many options. How many targets can he really get?
Absolutely. I absolutely think that you guys are actually both right. Giovanni Bernard will get the James White role, but it's going to be to such a smaller degree because there was no plethora of weapons at wide receiver. there was honestly not even as many weapons at tight end as there is now, because you add OJ Howard and Cameron Brate. It was just Gronk. Now, granted, it's not the same Gronk, but I think you get where we're going here. And then there's too many weapons, and I think sometimes people can get too involved. And I noticed this in projections, and it's something I've learned to lean away from over the years, because I'm in like year 4 or 5 of doing this now, is that people get honed in on this quarterback targets this position this percent of the time, and it's consistent. Well, everything has to be taken in with context, and it's not going to be that way when the weapons are completely different. The scheme is completely different. The situation, everything has changed from New England. So I don't expect the running back share to be what it was in New England. And, you know, Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones, if they're in there on first and second downs most of the time, and every here and there on a third down, they're still going to get some of the targets too. But I actually have Giovanni Bernard's stat line pulled up since he asked about him. I have 68 targets for him for 54 receptions, but he's only got like 550, 600 total yards because he's not going to get much carries. So if you're in like a super deep league, he could be like maybe a third flex. Like I'm talking deep leagues, but he's not really somebody that I think should be on your radar.
Yeah, Cal, I think that, you know, and just that last one that you pulled up, hashtag late round value, I feel like, you know, he could be as a floor guy. You know, if you're thinking about a bye week fill-in that you know is not going to put up a 0 for you, then okay, he'll get you a couple of points because you know he'll catch a couple of passes. I don't think he's going to play the James White role because he's not going to be as heavily involved, like Brandon was saying. But you got to think of the other factor too. Brady wanted him there for a reason. And it's not just because Ronald Jones has hands of stone and can't catch a pass out of the backfield. So that was a part of it. But Gio Bernard's a phenomenal blocker. This whole team is built around blocking and protecting Tom Brady. Tom Brady knows that if Gio Bernard's behind him, he could set a nice block and then sneak out if none of those other weapons are open to catch a couple of yard pass and get that first down. So there's other factors there too.
I want to come back to that here in just a second, actually, because I want to ask you a little bit about was it 43, 44-year-old? But let's talk about a bust this season. And, you know, I think things probably culminate into, with all these weapons, it's hard to imagine Tom Brady. But at some point, Father Time catches up. Could this be the year, Brandon?
No way. No way. Because, man, people ask me this all the time. I don't think that Tom Brady's going to fall off of a cliff, right? Because unless it's due to injury, if there's an injury, absolutely, but you can say that for anybody. He is probably the best and smartest, most intelligent person when it comes to taking care of his body. Mike Evans, actually, I was watching like a conference a couple days ago. Mike Evans was talking about how his body feels better now working with Tom Brady and getting advice from Tom Brady in year 8 than it did in his rookie season and his sophomore season and his third season, etc. He said he feels better now, and Tom Brady has helped actually multiple players learn how to take care of their bodies, extend their career, all that stuff. So you won't see this from Tom Brady. It's going to be like that. That's how I think the decline is going to be, especially because he's somebody that is not – look, Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback. Russell Wilson is a great quarterback, but Tom Brady is one that has always relied on his mind. That's what's always made him elite. It's never been the arm talent. So even as the arm talent digresses, he still has great weapons and a great mind. So who cares if he can't throw, which he can, but if all of a sudden he was not able to throw even 40 yards down the field, like Phillip Rivers seemed like last season, right? He's got better weapons, and he knows, hey, I can give it to Godwin at the five yards across the line of scrimmage, and he can make another 7 yards out of it because we've got so many weapons, and I could do this to Antonio Brown, to Tyler Johnson, to the running backs, anybody I want. And it's not even, you know, you can easily just chip down the field. So I don't think we should have any worry about Tom Brady.
If we have all those weapons and we're drafting Chris Godwin at wide receiver 15 and Mike Evans at wide receiver 18, JB, can they live up to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, we don't have a dominant RB1 here. You know, it's not like we're talking about having CMC on this team. So they're going to pass the ball. And Tom Brady is a magician. I mean, talking about what Brendan was saying, he's not just going to fall off a cliff. Watching him last year still thread the needle. There were a few balls that he threw, and I'm like, no. And then it just zips through the defenders. I'm like, whoa. So, like, he can find them. He knows how to find them. So I definitely think that they could support that. A lot of people are worried about them because you have a full season of AB this year, but there's going to be enough volume to go around. I mean, Tom threw 40 touchdowns last year, so there's going to be enough to support them both as long as they stay healthy.
I love that. Yeah, we got some Rojo love here in the chat from Alex. Rojo being a beast. Let's talk about the targets then. As I mentioned there, like who out of all of these weapons, Brandon, leads the team in targets?
So I think this is something that you can have a healthy debate on, and I'm not going to argue whoever you go with. I'm going with Mike Evans, but it's by a very, very small amount. I have 6 targets difference between Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. The reason I say Mike Evans is because we're not going to see that early on, like 1 target, 2 target games, because as you saw, as the season progressed, Mike Evans started being a lot more involved with the offense. His chemistry got better with Tom Brady. Tom Brady started targeting him a lot more, despite Antonio Brown now being on the field and Chris Godwin being on the field. Don't forget, though, Chris Godwin did have that messed up finger, and it seemed like it kind of changed things up a little bit. But Mike Evans has the most defined role in this offense. He is the guy that Brady looks for in the red zone. He is the guy in the 50-50 situations. Now, the other guys are good at that too, but Godwin and AB, especially if you look at like depth of target and all that stuff, they run a lot more similar route trees and play more similar roles than what Mike Evans does on the field. So I think Mike Evans is probably the safest for at least being like a very good high floor baseline player, especially because he's going to get the touchdowns. So Mike Evans is probably one that I like drafting between him and Godwin. AB is always going to be a good pick just because where he's at ADP wise. But I'm sure you want to switch over to JB, but I do want to get in some talk about how good they can be, all 3 of them together, because I have some stats for that.
Okay, yeah. Let's we'll hit that in here in just a second. JB, who leads the team in targets?
So I could easily make that argument for Evans too, and the concern of Godwin being the guy who comes off the field when they go into 2 wide sets and AB playing on the other side of things is a point to be taken too. But for the sake of argument, I'll say that it's Godwin because of his versatility. Godwin could play inside, Godwin could play outside. So if they go 3 wide, he could play the slot. If they go 2 wide or 4 wide, he could play outside, however they want to play him. He's very versatile. We know Tom Brady historically has loved the guy who plays in the slot. So now with the full season of AB, you put AB on one side, Mike Evans on the other, let Godwin run around in the slot. The question was who leads the team in targets. I still think Mike Evans could score more touchdowns and score more fantasy points, but I think with more time being allowed to play in the slot, Chris Godwin could lead the team in targets.
So Chris Godwin had 86, but it was in 12 games, and Mike Evans had 107, I believe, total. But AB in like 8 games had 45 targets. That could put him on like a 90 target pace, and that's just coming in like in game 9. I want to say, week 9 was the first time he was on the field. Like, is it out of the realm of possibilities that Antonio Brown like leads the league in receiving this year? Like, that feels like oddly a possibility somehow.
Dude, I'm getting him in like the 10th and 11th round in most of my drafts. So if that's the case, I'll be ecstatic. But I'm going to take it with a grain of salt because a lot of those games where he was being heavily targeted was with either Godwin or Evans out or banged up. So, you look at all 3 of them being healthy. I don't see that happening. But again, both of those guys have had injury history. So if AB is the one of the 3 who stays healthy and the others don't, yeah, it could happen.
Brandon, you think it's crazy?
I don't know. Did you say lead the league or lead the team? Lead the team.
Lead the league.
No, man, come on. No, there's too many weapons for that. I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, no, that's not true. I would be surprised if he led the team, but it's definitely a possibility. And where he's being taken at, I would say it's definitely a worthy pick. In fact, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, all 3 of them on the field at the same time last year, were all between 14 and 16 fantasy points per game. That's with Godwin with a messed up finger, and that's with Antonio Brown being force-fed, which was super painful to watch. I don't know if you remember that. But like the first few games, like AB clearly doesn't know what he's doing. Tom Brady doesn't know what AB's doing. And that was the cause for some interceptions, some stalled drives and stuff, because the Bucs offense actually is one of the few in the NFL where the wide receivers make the decision on what route they're going to run, and the quarterback has to anticipate it. And that's why Bruce Arians has one of the most difficult offenses for a quarterback to get used to, because he doesn't know, pre-snap. And even when he calls the play, he doesn't know if Mike Evans is going to run a 9 or cut a crossing route across the middle of the field. He has to anticipate it based off what Mike Evans is seeing. And he has to do this for 3 receivers. So that's a huge problem with the chemistry. Just a little rant there in the beginning for Antonio Brown. But anyways, they were all really good for fantasy. They were all top, I think, 24 or 25 wide receivers points per game when they were all healthy together. So by all means, you can draft your Bucs receivers, but AB is probably the best value.
If you just looked at the targets per game, Antonio Brown actually led the team. 7.8 per game was the best mark on the team. And he's not getting drafted near that. I just think he represents a lot of value on the team. He probably doesn't lead the team in targets. Almost certainly doesn't lead the league in receiving, like I said. But, you get the best, maybe the best quarterback ever, and maybe one of the best wide receivers ever. It's not, Tom Brady seemed like the kind of guy that, Peyton Manning went out and threw 49 touchdowns. He was like, fine, I'm going to go throw 50. It just seems like him and Antonio Brown together could be like, we're going to go do something crazy and just make it happen. But we talked a little bit about the running backs. We don't have to spend too much time. Brandon, if you're projecting this, sound like Rojo would be your answer for rush attempts?
Yes. So I'll pull that up right now. I have Ronald Jones at 187 carries to Leonard Fournette's 154. But if you are somebody that drafts Ronald Jones, trust me, be patient. Because with what Leonard Fournette did in the playoffs, it would be very difficult for this coaching staff to come out week 1, especially with some of the things that Fournette has voiced, and just say, yeah, Ronald Jones is our lead rusher right now, and he's going to come out in the first drive. I doubt that's going to happen, but I do think over the course of time, week 4, week 5, Ronald Jones will start taking that main carry share.
What do you think, JB?
Well, what's funny is if Fournette didn't have the playoffs that Fournette had, we wouldn't even be talking about him right now. It's just that spurt that he had as playoff Lenny made everyone think, oh my God, he's back. He's better than Rojo. But he's not. Throughout the course of the season, he wasn't. And I don't think that, like you said, look, we're going to get some respect paid to playoff Lenny. He's going to get some volume, but it's going to be Rojo as the lead back. He's going to lead the team in rushing attempts. And keep in mind, there's Bruce Arians is a guy who's no nonsense. He don't care. So with all the vaccine stuff going on, and not to make this into a political thing, but Leonard Fournette is not vaccinated, and Bruce Arians has been adamant about getting everybody on the same page. So if Fournette decides to, dig his heels in on that, there might be a problem there. Bruce Arians might say, get lost. It's Bruce's world, and we're just living in it.
Yeah, there was a quote last week that he thinks of Leonard Fournette as the co-starter with Ronald Jones. It's just scary. It just feels like an avoid situation to me, overall. Before we get into the very last question, we didn't talk too much about the tight ends. You got OJ Howard coming back from Achilles injury. That's one that we know how rare that kind of come back from is. We've heard a lot about that with Cam Akers recently. Had a lot of talent, a lot of athleticism. Gronk's in front of him. Cameron Brate's on the pup. How does the targets get distributed between the tight ends, Brandon?
So this is actually cool that we have a good cast here to talk about this. I have OJ Howard leading the tight end room in targets, and it's for a couple reasons, right? Gronk, first off, is somebody who has dealt with injuries in the past. He's somebody that we want absolutely to be blocking as a tight end instead of OJ Howard. Plus, we need Gronk. We know how clutch he is. We know what he has with Tom Brady. We need him in the playoffs. And now we know we're going to make the playoffs. So why put all this extra work on Gronk's plate when you have a younger, more athletic tight end who's on a contract year that you need to figure out if he's your future or not, because Gronk won't be here for very long. He's probably not even here next season. So it just makes too much sense to me when you have so many weapons. You don't need Gronk to risk getting hurt. You want him for the playoffs. He's the better blocker, so it's less likely he's going to run routes. And OJ Howard, you need to figure out if this is your guy for the future or not. So I think OJ Howard's actually going to lead the team over the regular season, which is what matters for fantasy football, in targets and receptions for the tight end position.
It's pretty bold, JB. What do you think?
I agree with him as long as he's healthy, as long as he comes back
go.
okay. Because if you think about it, look, he is a phenomenal pass catcher. He's an athlete. And Bruce Arians looks at him that way too. Bruce Arians has made comments saying, he's the sky's the limit for what he could do in the offense, and that was a pretty recent quote from Bruce. So he knows that he's coming back. You talked about Cam Akers, and we talk about the Achilles. It's different for pass catchers. We've seen guys like Emmanuel Sanders have that injury and come back and be fine. So I think as long as he's healthy, he is the pass catcher. And, Gronk is the guy who I think, you talk about who the sleeper is going to be this year. If you talk about who the bust is going to be on the Bucs, it could be Gronk because he's going to be touchdown dependent in my mind. People that are drafting him as their primary tight end, they're going to have a hard time pinpointing the games that he's going to produce for you. He's been vocal about coming to Tampa to block for Tom. We know, like I said before, protecting Tom is the number one priority for the Bucs. And we know he's a very good blocker. So with all the receiving weapons the Bucs have, with OJ coming back, a full season of AB again, Gronk's going to be blocking a ton. So he's still going to get his red zone targets. He's still going to get his TDs, but I don't see him getting much volume. And I think he's going to be hit or miss every week.
Plus, if you actually remember from last year, Gronk was unusable in fantasy until OJ Howard got hurt. His first touchdown catch was versus the Packers. I don't remember what week that was, but I know it was like at least week 5. It might have been week 7. I think it was 5 though. But he was unusable,
Week
and
6.
he was the one person. It was 6. Okay, perfect. He was the one person on the team that had pre-established chemistry with Brady, and yet he still wasn't used as the primary tight end. So I think that's also good to contribute there.
So tight ends aren't a linear depth chart, and Andrew Cooper, one of my besties that's on the show with me, he's a tight end guru, and he always talks about the different trees that a guy comes up, right? So if you look at every team, it's not a linear depth chart on tight end, and if OJ Howard's the receiving tight end and Gronk is the blocking tight end, that's not going to change. They're going to stay on that root of the tree.
No, I love that. That's really cool. So here's a random question that you weren't prepared for, but how many pass catchers on Tampa Bay could you name before you would take a Saints pass catcher over them? 7?
No, I'd still only say 4.
Still only 4? Yeah, I feel like OJ Howard would be the best skill position player on the Saints right now, outside of Michael Thomas. But with him being hurt, oh yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah, Monty wants OJ to be traded. All right, last question. Last year, now the Bucs I think are on an 8-game win streak right now. But so remember, a 17-game season. What's the Bucs record in 2021, JB?
So conservatively, I'd say that they'd be 11-6, but they could easily be 13-4. I think looking at the schedule, I think looking at the home games, the Buffalo game's the only one that I think we might lose at home. We could go undefeated at home, but we might lose that Buffalo game. And then if you look at the road games, they're at the Rams and they're at Washington. So those will be tough. So if you give them those 3 games, and then you slip up 1, 2, maybe 3 games the most that they underperform. I mean, I think it's all hinging on staying healthy, obviously, and the secondary playing well. But this could easily be a 13-4 team. But I'll say 11-6 to be conservative.
What do you think, Brandon?
I'm going right in between what he said. I'm going 12-5. And I also want to say, do you guys? I have a question for you guys. Do you think there's any team in the NFC outside of the Packers, which I still don't think they'll do it, but outside of the Packers that can come out on top in the NFC? Who is stopping the Bucs outside of the possible Packers from getting to the Super Bowl? I think there's one team, and I don't think they're mentioned enough, but outside of that, I think it's going to be pretty tough to knock us off.
It's the Bucs and the Rams for me. Those are the 2.
Yeah, I would say – go ahead. No, he
I'm
said the Bucks and the Rams. He said Bucks and Rams, and
I agree.
And the Rams is one of the teams that I think can. I don't think Washington's a great team, but they gave us a tough test in the playoffs last year. That defense is phenomenal. So that's why I think both of those road games that we have this year against both of those potential contenders will be very telling for us. I think that outside of the Packers, those are the two teams that would give us the most trouble in the NFC. Definitely nobody in our division.
How much do you want to see Ryan Fitzpatrick against the Bucks next year in the playoffs? That would be so much fun. That would be great. I'd love that.
Yeah. With Adam Humphries. He's got his boy Hump too.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Oh, that would be great. Yeah, but I think the Rams are the only ones, and mainly because of the defense. Now, obviously, Washington as well, like you mentioned, because of the defense, but we'll see how the offense comes along for them. Tampa Bay's bringing everybody back. So all 22 starters back. It just continuity, all kind of stuff here. So, I just think that's the way to go. Well, yeah, there we go. I think that does it. I think that just about breaks down everybody that we need to know for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Hold on, Cal. Where do you have our record this year?
Oh, gosh, man. I think you guys hit it. I think it's hard to, on a 17-game season, it's hard to go much higher than 13 wins, but if Tampa Bay ended up winning more games than that, I don't know that I'd be surprised. I don't think there's anybody in the NFC South. Obviously, I'm a Saints fan, but my expectations are low for the Saints. But Carolina, I don't think you expect them to put up much of a fight for the division. I don't think you expect Atlanta to put up much of a fight for the division. Saints, I don't think so. It's just a matter of do they take their foot off the gas a little bit at the end and maybe slip up a couple times because, or whatever. But I don't even know if Tom Brady's going to let him do that. I just, part of me is he could keep it down and you could see this team win 15 games and it wouldn't be too much of a shock.
And honestly, Cal, that's why I'm happy we play Buffalo and the Rams and Washington, because our division's going to be such a cakewalk that, you're playing those scrub teams 6 times during the season. Mm-hmm. You want some heavy competition to keep yourselves going. So I'm glad we got some tough teams on the schedule.
And I want to mention, since we've got, 2 teams represented right now in the division, I think the Panthers made such a great mistake in the draft. I honestly think they could have been the leader of this division for the next few years after this one, or whenever we lost Brady, if they took Justin Fields. They're going to regret that for a really long time.
Yeah, I think after that trade with Sam Darnold, I think that kind of put things to where they, I did do the Panthers preview with Jeff Hazley and a couple other good folks, Jordan Vanek and Tripp. That was a good preview. They're excited about Sam Darnold. We'll see how things go there. But when Joe Brady's coaching the Bengals next year, that's it's going to look a lot different there. So,
yep.
All right. So for these guys, make sure you're following them. For DLF, I am at Calvin and Hobby. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Just look down there. Just make sure it says subscribe. Hit the button. Click the notifications, smash the like button, comments. Make sure you put all that in there. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. That would definitely be a huge favor. I would appreciate that. So for these guys, for DLF,